fans watching around the world, welcome to the Snowman Cycling channel. One of the most common questions I get is what can I do to improve my racing and get myself onto my first Zwift racing podium? Well, don't worry, because this episode I've got you covered and we're going to have a look at some tips, techniques and tactics that are going to help you get your first Zwift racing podium. Let's jump into this one. Okay, my Snowper stars around the world watching, let's jump into this one. It's quite a short race, so we're going to sit through the whole thing and I'm going to talk you through the most important bits that you need to keep aware of. Starting with this, tip 1, make sure that when the banner drops out of the pen, you are straight out of the gate like a bat out of hell. You want to be at the front of the group. You definitely don't want to be at the back of the group, because if everybody else comes out really fast and you're not paying attention, you're going to get dropped out of the gate. And believe me, when I first started Zwift racing, that is exactly what I used to do every single race. So the most important tip here, make sure you get fast out of that pen if you want to have a chance at being at the front of that group. Because otherwise, like these poor riders who are 3-4 seconds behind me, you're going to be dropped off the back of the group before we've even completed the lead-in. And even if you don't get dropped, you're going to have to use quite a lot of energy to move up to that group. So do yourself a favour, do that at the start. Make sure that you don't have to put in any extra energy that you don't need. And as we can see from this race, we see that it's a mixed category field. So that means A, B, C, D. All of those pens are mixed up together. So it's even more important to make a fast start, because you could potentially get towed by some of those A riders or higher category riders. And the riders in your category are going to be left behind. And that feeds into tip 2, a tip that I really wish I'd taken on board properly at the very start of my Zwift racing career. This was nearly 4 years ago and I was very much a novice. The main thing that I do differently now is making sure that before these races start, I am warmed up properly, because otherwise things like this happen when as soon as you hit an incline at the start of the race, that's when you're doing your warm-up. So that really hurts, and I end up finding it quite difficult to move up here, and I very nearly get dropped on this incline because I haven't warmed up properly enough. So after this, I actually respond a little bit better and I'm able to get into the groove. But that moment there was really silly. If I just spent 15-20 minutes on the bike doing zone 2 in advance of this, I'd be in a much better position. But because of that, I'm doing my warm-up now and I don't feel like I'm properly warmed up until halfway through the race. And when you've got the complexion and the body makeup of a walking skeleton, it is even more important to make sure that you get that blood pumping through the legs and the rest of your body so you're able to compete when everybody else is going full gas from the start. And that is exactly what we do see at this point in the race. The 3 strongest riders in this group: Elvius Brisson, he's an A+ rider; Shane Pollington, he's an A rider; and Loris van der Kasteel, he's a really strong B rider. Look, they are on the front of this group going as hard as they can. So as well as being warmed up, tip 3 is to always let those stronger riders do the dirty work. Let them put down the power. You just sit on the wheels, let them drag you around the course. And remember, we're getting away from all the riders who are behind us. Their hard work on the front of this group is benefiting us, and it's just going to tire them out later on. So we're going to let those riders do that. There's no need for us to come to the front of the group, start putting any power down when other people are on the front of this group doing 5 or 6 watts per kilo. And we're going to translate that trick into tip 4, which is, if you can, always do your homework on the riders in the race around you. You're not going to be able to do it on everybody. You won't know ahead of time everybody that's going to sign up. But if you get a look at the Zwift Power sign-ups to see who is already signed up to this race, how strong they are, what their skill sets are, then you're going to have the advantage over the other riders in your group when it hits race time. So that's what I do now. I'm able to know who the strong riders are and I let them do their thing. And I make sure that I just follow the wheels if they try to go past. That also helps us develop a plan for the end game, should we get there, if we know the strengths and how strong the riders around us are. So we'll pick up on that one later on. But first, we found our way into tip 5, which is similar to tip 3 in letting the stronger riders do the work. But this time, we're going to make sure that we aren't doing any extra work that we don't have to. As you could see on the descent there, I was dangling a little bit off the back of the group because I wasn't afraid of getting dropped. I knew that that would come back together and I didn't want to do any more work than I had to do, because we're going to need it later on against these super strong riders who have got way more power in the tank than me, so we're going to have to be careful about how we use our watts and keep our powder dry for later on when we're really going to need them. And that's where our homework from earlier on isn't finished yet, because as well as having the drop on the riders around you in the race, it's also super important to know exactly what the route you're doing is, because you can use that to your advantage. If you're a heavy guy who likes the flat, then you're obviously not going to be doing too well on the Alp to Zwift. So find a course that suits your skill set, that gives you the maximum chance of climbing onto that podium, and means that it's not going to be a massive surprise when you come across the next hill. You may find it hard to believe, but that's how I used to race. I didn't really pay too much attention to the course, how much climbing it had. I just used to turn up, race, and give it my best shot. And that's a great way to get a good workout in. I really advised sometimes just turning up and giving it a go. But if you want the win, if you want the best chance of getting onto the podium, then it makes sense for you to have had a look at the parcours of this course earlier on to know when you're going to need to save energy and when you're going to need to go all out. And for me, that means that on this course, I know that coming up in just a K or two's time, we've got the formidable Watopia Forward KOM, and that's likely to be 4 minutes of absolute hell, where I'm at my threshold hanging on for dear life. But the good news for me is I am a lightweight rider, and that is a really steep climb. So that is one of the reasons that I earmarked this course initially and played to my strengths. I'm a sprinter, I'm a lightweight rider, so a short race with one steep climb should come in really, really useful for me. And it means that I know that I can try to save as much energy as I can on the other parts of the course like this when we're going easy, knowing that I'm going to have to go all in just a K or so's time. And remember to use your skill set importantly. If you're a sprinter, try not have too much climbing in that race, but if you've got no sprint whatsoever, you're probably going to need some climbing or some difficulties in there to stand a chance of getting a good result. And when we're talking about strengths and skill sets, that takes me on to tip 7, which is to know exactly where you sit in your category. So it doesn't matter what category you are, but if you're at the top or if you're at the bottom of your category, that should really influence the way that you're racing. If you're at the top of your category, you can afford to do crazier moves, more inefficient things, and try to hurt some of the weaker riders and get rid of them before the end. But if you're at the lower end of your category, you need to do the absolute most efficient riding that you can to save as much energy for later on. And if you're a rider that's at the lower end of their category, you definitely want to think more about doing flatter races where you're going to be able to find it easier to hold on to the group of the stronger riders around you, because there's more draft and there's less parcours for them to get away. You don't want to be doing the sort of races that have lots of climbs and are more dependent on watts per kilo unless you're at the top of your category. It's actually a lot easier than people think to get a good result when you're at the bottom end of your category, but you have to be clever about it, you have to play your cards right, and you have to do everything to the letter of the law. But we've seen it happen plenty of times on my channel, on other channels. The rider with the least watts per kilo can definitely win that race. The aim of racing is to be doing the least work possible to get the best result. If you're the rider with the highest watts per kilo in the race and you didn't win, you messed up badly. If you are the rider with the lowest watts per kilo and you manage to win that race, that shows that you have excellent racecraft and excellent efficiency, and that should be the aim. Try to win a race where you're doing less power and less watts per kilo than the other riders around you, and that will make you a better racer. For tip 8, as we can see here, we're hitting the steepest, the hardest part of the whole course. The tip here would definitely be, if you've got a power up that is going to be useful, like a feather, don't forget about it and get caught up in the moment. Make sure you use your power up and get the same advantage as everybody else, because otherwise you're working harder than they are for the same result. And I definitely got caught up in the moment there. I wanted to come around that rider Szymanski who got dropped off the back, and that's another important thing to note. Don't expect the riders around you to do the work for you. Most of the time at this point, they're absolutely cooked. Everybody is on the limit. I was on the limit there. That was all I had in the tank to come around Szymanski and manage to get onto this group. And we can see it takes me a few seconds to close in on them. So you have to be positioned well. You have to be willing to move up if the gap's open and nobody's able to close them ahead of you. And as we can see here, Szymanski does manage to TT his way back onto the group, but he's had to use more energy than everybody else, who was recovering in the draft of the group, whilst he was still having to do 4.5 to try and catch on. And as we can see here, this group has reduced massively. There's only 6 of us in the front. So at this stage, I know I've got a really good chance of being able to get onto that podium. But first, I have to make it over this climb alive. And as you can see, I am really gritting my teeth. I am really puffing out air. But that's where our homework from earlier on comes in really, really useful. Because I know I just have to get to the top of this climb, and then it's a descent straight into the sprint finish. So as a sprinter, I'm just keeping my eye on that. You could see there I poured water onto the back of my neck. I definitely don't recommend that one as tip number 9. Try and avoid electrocuting yourself whilst you're on the trainer. Instead, get yourself a couple of really good floor fans. I invested in 3 floor fans that I have right now for my racing setup, and it was the best value for money purchase I've ever made to my racing setup, including my power meter, including my turbo trainer. So for tip 10, keep yourself cool, because there's nothing that limits your performance like overheating, and nothing will overheat you like racing indoors on Zwift. And speaking of keeping it cool, that takes us to tip 11. Make sure you're not wearing one of these really stupid, over-the-top headsets that make it look like you're working in the world's hottest call center. They definitely don't look cool. They definitely don't keep you cool. You'll be sweating more than you need to if you're wearing one of these. So do yourself a favor. Get yourself some wireless headphones. Look cooler, feel cooler, be cooler. And that takes us into tip 12, which is when you are on the limit like this, when you are dangling off the back of the group, you have to give it everything you've got to cling on. If you let go of the group here, your race is over. You need to understand, if you let the group get away from you there, you are going to get dropped. The key is don't electrocute yourself like I nearly did by pouring water over yourself there. And remember that everybody in this race is absolutely hurting as well. Nobody feels good. And the key is to break these races down into smaller segments. Don't think about the whole thing in one go. Break it down into these little difficulties. If I was thinking about trying to win or get on the podium in this race at this point, it would have almost been too much, and I'd have said, oh, I'm too tired, I haven't got the energy, and I'd have dropped off. But instead, all I'm concerned about is clinging onto this group until the top of this climb over the banner. And then it's going to be a total reset. Everybody's going to rest, everybody's going to recover, including me, and all of a sudden we'll be feeling a bit better. So all you have to do is break these races down into these smaller segments, more manageable, bite-sized pieces. You'll be able to take a little bit easier and con your legs and con your lungs into thinking that they've got a bit more left than they have in the tank. And for top tip 13, we're going to enjoy our recovery, enjoy this descent, and do as little work as possible. Because with just 1.2 kilometers of downhill descent to the finish, it means that we're going to have to think really hard about how we're going to approach this finale. And the great news for us and for you is that all is fair in love, war, and sprinting. And when you get to the end of one of these Zwift races, everything that's happened before this point is irrelevant. It doesn't matter that I was the weakest of these 6 riders on the climb, because we're not on a climb. We're going into a descent finish of 200-300 meters. It's going to be about who's got the power, who's got the watts in the legs, and who wants to get that finishing position more badly than the other riders. So we're going to get our heart rate down, spin the legs, and try and get as much recovery as we possibly can before this finish. And as we can see, there's 0.5 kilometers left on this course, so we're going to have to think about it really soon. But thankfully for us, this is where one of our earlier tips about knowing the course comes in handy, because there wasn't 0.3 kilometers left of this race. There was 700 meters. If I'd gone then and taken Zwift's word for it, I'd have ruined my race. It was a glitch. Some of you might remember that glitch from a while ago, but because I knew where the finish line was and I knew the course, I didn't fall for it. And we're also going to revisit another tip from earlier on. As I neglect to use my power up here, I just totally lost focus. I was so concentrated on the sprint finish, and when people were going to launch, that I forgot about my power up and nearly cost myself at the end. So remember to use it if you've got it. And for the sprint finish itself, that's inevitably going to come at this point, make sure you're positioned as well as you can. I tried to give a little bit of a false bluff there to get the other riders to go, and it works. They launch their sprint and I'm able to get onto the train. And we do a throwback to another tip from earlier on, which is know your opponents. I know Shane Pollington is an amazing sprinter, far better than me, and I know if I can just get onto his wheel and do my power, that we will come across the line in second place there, like we do. We just clung on by 0.003 seconds. Would have been a bit easier if I'd used my power up, so I've only got myself to blame for that one. But as we can see there, I was one of the weakest riders in that group, and I still managed to get a good placing overall by using some of those tips, techniques and tactics that we just talked about to take home my first ever podium, which I was really pleased about, especially in a mixed category race. And as so it happened, it actually was my first ever win as well. I took the gold in the B category on Zwift Power, so I was really happy with that. Absolutely brutal race. I think that was my hardest race ever until that point. So I hope you found that useful. I hope you enjoyed looking back at that one as much as I did and taking on board some of the tips that we've learned in that time. Make sure to let me know down below in the comments if you found these tips helpful, if they helped you get your first podium, and if you've got any other tips that I haven't mentioned that you think we should be sharing with the viewers, leave them down below. So that's all for this week, guys. Thank you as always for watching. Remember to like, comment, most importantly subscribe, and as always, race fast, ride hard, and remember that you are appreciated.